Well, Patrice, welcome to Creative Survival. Thank you so much for joining us. For the audience, for you guys who don't know, Patrice and I go way back, and like back to our like struggling filmmaker days, and then
Yes.
over the course of the last like 10 years have been like no communication, and through like this miraculous thing and social media got reconnected, and now she gets to join us today and kind of just walk us through her journey of this thing we call creativity. So, Patrice, just kind of give us a little scoop on what you're currently doing.
Oh my gosh. Number one, thank you for even having me. This is so special and so cool. And again, being reconnected with you is like a total God thing. Like we can get into that later. But also, I want to apologize to your audience for my random white background, which is like, as a video production person, I'm a little ashamed of my background. And so don't hold it against me, everyone. I just didn't want you to see like my crazy, messy kitchen. So that was just like, what's a random wall? But anyway, a little bit about my journey into creativity. I've always loved stories since I was just super young. Grew up just devouring movies, loving different formats of stories from sitcoms. Media was just really my jam. And when I went to college at Pepperdine, I thought I was going to be in actually like radio, TV production, but the Lord sort of shifted my focus probably my junior year, and I ended up majoring in like English and drama and theater and kind of getting that background of story. And again, I was still hooked. I thought I was going to, direct or do something in the realm of theater. Just loved it, loved the atmosphere. And then I had gotten a crazy prophetic word basically in my senior year of being an undergrad. And it was like these different words of like being on red carpets and lots of lights and lots of like production things. And I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I knew that like there was a shift happening with from theater to like TV to like film. And I was like, there's something about like film production and stories on that level. And so I ended up in my senior year with no like, didn't major in like film production or anything like that as an undergrad. But I was like, you know what? I feel like the Lord is opening a door here, and I'm going to apply to USC Film School. And I was like, with no real prior experience. I mean, I have storytelling experience, and writing is one of my stronger, that's one of my strengths. And so I was like, okay, well, we're just going to like try and kill this application and just try to get creative, as possible and kind of nail these interviews. And I mean, literally the Lord supernaturally opened a door for me to go to USC. I mean, the long and the short of it is basically I had made it through a series, like different round. This is for graduate school at USC, made it through several rounds of like the interview process, what have you, but then found out like right before I graduated, I was going to be waitlisted. And I had all these prophetic words leading up to, waiting on this answer. And it was like, the lights, the camera, the red carpets, all these like production things just seemed like they were aligning with this. But yet I was waitlisted, didn't quite understand all that. And the Lord did something so sweet and tender in the space that I was waitlisted, because I graduate from Pepperdine in April. I have this encounter with the Lord, and I would love to go into that, but there's just some fun details that might take up too much time. But basically in May, the Lord confirmed like what I told you all year long, what I told you about going to USC is absolutely true. I told you you'd be in the fall. It will be in the fall. I was still waitlisted. There was no way for me to get in. I go back to New York to help my mom take care of my ailing grandma. And it was actually there in New York where I get this random call from USC. They're like, we don't know. We've had an abnormal amount of people decline this year, and we're going through the wait list, and you're next in line. Would you like to join, enter this program for the fall of this year? The exact time frame that the Lord told me. And I was just like, what? And again, it was this sort of acceleration. You wait so long, as you're contending or praying into something, and you get a prophetic word. And at that time, it was really just practice, because I was just holding onto a word for a year. But I know that there's some of us that are holding onto words for like 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. And you're just like, but what? But you know in your gut that God has spoken this thing. You know that he said that that is for you. And it wasn't for me like necessarily a pride thing, like, oh, I need to go to USC. But it was really like, but God told me. Like, I really felt that strongly. So long story short, I got into USC Film School, had the time of my life. And this is where your story and my story start to connect, because when I ended up working on it like a thesis film and doing different film projects, our mutual friend, Justin, connected us because it was for some project where I might have been looking for a director or an editor or someone who had like video production skills. And that was you. And we somehow we stayed connected because we had almost different projects. You were doing film stuff and I was doing film stuff, but this is over 10 years ago, which is bananas to say. But through that, after I graduated film school, I ended up interning again in TV production. And I ended up interning for the Emmy award shows. And just think back to those prophetic words of like red carpets and flashing lights and all those things, because this is where that prophetic word would actually come to fruition. And I interned that one show, made so many divine connections just interning again. And from there, basically snowballed my new career into TV production, because I thought I was going to do documentaries. I thought I was going to direct documentaries basically for the rest of my life. That's what I love to do. Those are the kind of stories that were my jam. And then all of a sudden I was back in TV production, but there was so much favor. And then the Lord created this position for me, which really didn't exist until about, 10 or 15 years ago, which is called like a dressing room manager or a celebrity hospitality specialist, or however depending on if you're working in the corporate world or whatever. And I just loved it because I loved creating atmosphere. It gave me a chance to pray over the dressing rooms of performers and artists. And I was still around creatives, and I was still around production, and I was around these red carpets. And I was just like, this is really interesting. And then long story short, I ended up working, and I still do work in the world of like live television, award shows, and variety specials, from this sort of very interesting journey that the Lord has taken me on. And just literally 2 years ago, the Lord said, basically dropped a creative blueprint in my spirit. I have never had that happen. I've always heard people getting those creative downloads and they just get witty inventions and ideas. And I was like, good for you. But like, literally, that's what this was. And I got this blueprint. And I remember even writing in my journal, I think this is a business plan. I don't know. And I was like, I need to have a name for it, I guess. And I happened to look up at my calendar. Literally, I'm laying on my bed writing this thing down. I'm like, God, what should I name it if this is going to be like a fun business experiment? And my calendar happened to have like Romans 8:28 on it, and it was in this beautiful calligraphy. And the two words that were highlighted, in that verse, like all things work together, for good for those that are called. So anyway, the two words that were highlighted were together and good, were like the largest print. And I was like, okay, let's just call it Together Good. And then I was like, I guess I got to slap like company at the end of it to make it like a legit business. And that was literally how my new company, Together Good Co., was birthed 2 years ago. And now, because of that company, I'm now reconnecting with so many that were a part of my journey, like you, 10 years ago, where we are through a series of events reconnected, but yet we see the Lord's hand in the journey. And so there's a lot of other details in it, but that was sort of my condensed way of getting you from then into now.
That's awesome. I would love your insight or what your view is for someone who maybe has grown up in church or maybe even hasn't even experienced church. But like, you always hear like, oh, someone gave me this word, or, God gave me this. Like, how does that look, or how did that look for you? And what was your journey through that?
Wow. That's such a great question. I think I really first got my taste of the prophetic in a real way. I think around my senior year, a lot of things were happening during that senior year of undergrad at Pepperdine. And I was going to a vineyard church And they were just really about operating in the gifts of the Spirit. And so prophecy, is like one of the gifts. And I had always had impressions, growing up, and sort of that gut feeling when you feel like something is about to happen and what have you, and just had no grid that it was like, oh my gosh, the Lord like could be a part of, like, this is like actually a God thing. This is so cool. And so when people would start to give prophetic words to me, they would actually teach a little bit about like what is a prophetic word. And a lot of times there's different time frames to a prophetic word. Like it could be now, or it could be it might be one of those things that you put on the shelf and just wait on the Lord to do those things. And so I felt that was actually handled really well, I think, for me, and modeled really well for me, because I know some people have had a really unhealthy experience with the prophetic. But I felt like I was, I guess, mentored a bit, and I had some really strong mentors that kind of broke down the prophetic. So when I would get prophetic words, true, in the beginning, I thought, okay, this means it's going to happen next week. But, as I was sharing with the USC prophetic word, that was my very first experience navigating a word that you get, in September, and you don't see the fruition of it until July of the following year. And that sounds, long, but it's not long. That's really less than a year's time. But that actually showed me like, wow, God doesn't forget. Like prophetic words are still legit if they take a long time. But in that, you get to really find out what you're made of. Because I mean, for sure, I like lost my mind. I felt like I was losing my mind. I ran out of patience. I was crying. I was having emotional breakdowns. I was like, so it's like, I don't want to paint this picture of like, oh yeah, I got this word and then I waited and I just like sipped some tea and like hung out at the beach. No, because like I'm like a doer. I'm a go-getter. And a lot of times with prophetic words, it's not about trying to make that thing happen. It's like, just do the thing that God has called you to do in front of you, or just trust God, or just be with him. And you're just like, but that doesn't feel productive. That's not like what this word is about. And I feel like the Lord is actually really trying to display a fresh way of how he loves us to us in the prophetic word. It's not so much just about doing and the accomplishing of a thing. He's like, I'm actually going to tangibly show you how much I love you, because my love knows no bounds. And it's not just about you doing something for me or me needing you to be a worker bee. It's like, I actually want to be extravagantly loving you through this. And I think that was something that I would learn maybe many years later, not in the beginning, because I was just like, oh, okay, he gave me the word happened. Okay, God is real, cool. But I've learned now that it was like, just allow the Lord to actually encounter you in the waiting. Like, let him encounter you in the waiting. Let him speak some things to your heart in the waiting. And when that prophetic words, I'm in the middle of this now, as certain things are starting to like come to fruition and like happen, I'm just like, okay, the excitement of that thing is beautiful, but like, God, what are you saying? How are you revealing yourself to me in this? Because I recently came across this quote just the other day from a book. And it's like the subtitle of a book, but it was like, how to know God's will for your life or something to that effect. But the subtitle was, his presence is the plan. Mm-hmm. His presence is the plan. And I was like, boop, like done. Like, yes, like his presence is the plan, like that. And so I think if you kind of also add the idea of the prophetic to where it's not just about, you knowing that your future, what have you, but really encountering God in it, I think that also shifts your heart towards the prophetic, especially if you've been wounded by the prophetic or you haven't been mentored very well in it, which can be really damaging, which have plenty of friends that have been really damaged and very hurt. And my heart breaks for that, because that's not God's heart.
No, and it's hard too, because I remember the first time someone gave me a word, and like I grew up in church, but like that like stuff happened, but not like as like normal as like other groups. And I remember just a stranger came up and then told me something, and I was like, all right, weirdo, like that doesn't even sound anything close to like what's gonna happen. And then sure enough, like 5 years later, after going through some stuff, like something came to fruition, and like that popped in my mind, and I'm like, so Yeah, it's weird. Like if you don't know about it, or if you're not like, cause for anyone who hasn't experienced like getting like a true like prophetic work, it's not like someone comes up to you like in a movie and they're like they hold your hand and they're like,
Right.
oh, I see everything that's gonna happen, and like it's like this big flashback of like your
Yeah.
whole life, and they can tell you how you're gonna die.
Yeah.
It's just literally
Yeah.
someone like God gives them a word and they come up to you and like, hey, you're gonna have a community, or like hey, there's gonna be red carpets in your future, and like it sometimes it feels so vague. You know, you can just get like
Yes.
wrapped in the spiral, and you're like, well, oh, red carpets. Well,
Yes.
I mean, the Grammys are next month. I clearly must be
Yeah.
going to them as like one of the stars. Like,
Yes. 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 Absolutely.
it's yeah, so it's yeah, it could be really good, but if you're not sure how to like understand that, or like if depending on how your relationship is or what your beliefs are, like if you can't sit, like you said, if you can't sit in that time of waiting and just wait for like more download, it could be pretty rocky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned though too, like, or this actually like made me think of something else when like a stranger comes up to you, or someone you don't know too, that gives you a prophetic word. I love how the word is just like, also you have permission to weigh the word. Like we don't have to receive every prophetic word just because someone says that this is what the Lord told me, or the Lord says this. And that was something that I learned really early on. And this comes from actually having really good mentors and just wise counsel around me. Because it was just like, just because, and I think too, because of who I am, I'm just like, what? Let's see, who are you? Are you trustworthy? And so it was like, just because you get a prophetic word, it doesn't mean automatically you just eat it. First of all, you need to like make sure that that thing is like legit and bring it before the Lord first. What I personally love, because I try to be more and more intentional about my quiet time and my time with the Lord, and I guard that, like I really do guard that. Um, I love it when prophetic words basically confirm what the Lord's already spoken to me, where I'm just kind of like wavering, like, oh, my future is whatever. And then someone will just come and literally speak to that very thing that I was asking the Lord, or the very thing that I thought I wasn't hearing as clearly. Those to me are my favorite and the most profound prophetic words. I think when you're first starting out with the prophetic, we get really wowed with like the people that do know, like get a word of knowledge, which is basically knowing, supernatural, godly, holy knowledge of either your things in your past or your present condition that they would have no idea about unless it was by the Spirit of God. And I love that, and getting wowed, by that. That's, incredible. But, like I said, sorry, I almost just lost my train of thought. Um, gosh, got so excited about like word of knowledge, and I was like, ugh. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, you can totally, you have permission like to weigh the word. And I think I was just mentioning though, like with word of knowledge, you can be so flashy, and it can so be, very accurate. But like again, even if you've gotten an accurate word from a prophetic person before, you still have permission to like weigh that word and bring it before the Lord, you and him, and see what he's speaking to you on it as well. Like that should be standard always. Anytime you get, even I don't care if it is like the biggest, baddest, most amazing prophet ever. Like be gracious, you don't have to like punch somebody in the neck and just like, shut up, you're dumb. Like you don't need to do that.
You don't know me.
But like, you don't know me. You don't know my business. But like totally, weigh it, before the Lord, you and the Lord for sure, and decide if that's really a legit word for you. He'll tell you. The Lord will tell you. The Lord will confirm some things.
Especially if you show up like to him wanting to hear from him, rather
Yes.
than just like it'd be like if someone came into your house and they started yelling at you for answers, and you're like, what are you doing, rather than them coming, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Show up with the proper relationship and posture.
That's good.
I'm curious too. So for you, growing up in church and also being creative in church, how did that affect your creative journey? Because I found, especially for myself and a lot of people I know, like a lot of times church could be pretty boxy when it comes to imagination or creativity, and like everything lives in this, and like shove all of that in there and it has to fit in here. Even God has to fit in this box, and this is our vision. And
Yeah.
it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
So, was that growing up in that environment, was that helpful for your creativity, or did you find yourself having to break out of certain boxes?
Okay, I'll start with the disclaimer. Like, I'm super like weird and like, I mean, I'm just quirky, I should say, and I've always been quirky. Like, I mean, people that have known me from elementary school and know me now, they're like, yeah, you're Patrice. Like, like, so the Lord has given me like a very interesting personality, and yeah, I feel like because of like how the Lord has made me, I'm always try, and not even to be like a stickler or trying to necessarily like poke the fire, but like I'm always trying to see things from outside of the box. That was just how I was, always growing up. And to know, I went to a Christian school my entire life. I didn't actually share that with you earlier. And so my upbringing in church was not only just, a church on Sunday, but it was 5 days a week. My classes started with prayer, and we had chapel every Friday, and so I think too, the rhythm of my life was actually set in a very profound way by the Lord before I even knew what was really happening. And yet, um, because of like the different, at 16, I took my first film course at like the local community college, which is right across the street actually from my Christian school. And this may have been a good or bad thing, I think, because the Christian school, I don't want to say they were just about appearances. It was like, just kind of appear to be a good Christian, because they weren't as concerned necessarily about like what you were doing in your personal, they were to a certain extent, but like, yeah, I want to tread that very lightly, but all to say there was sort of license and freedom for people to kind of really explore, I think, other things that are not just within a quote unquote churchy box, but also I saw the humanity of like the teachers at this particular Christian school, where there was some moral failings that happened. And even as a kid, I just realized it's just like people are humans, like regardless if they're following Jesus or not. And so there is a whole other storyline that is out there. Whether we try to cover it up in the church or not, there are people that are struggling. There's what have you. And so with that knowledge, and then taking my first film course at 16, where the first film that I saw uh, was a documentary. And it to this day is one of my favorite documentaries, because it totally wrecked my heart for this people group. But it's called Paris is Burning, and it's about drag queens in New York City, and it's about the Vogue movement in New York City. And I just remember, like, I watched this documentary in this film. I was like the youngest kid, in this class, but I was like, I was weeping, like watching this story. And it was like, how do you make a story like that? Like, I want to be able to impact and bring light to. I had no idea that this subculture existed. I had no idea about the depth of, at that time, the HIV and the AIDS epidemic. It just opened this story. This is, why I got so connected to documentaries later on, was like, this is out here and nobody's told me about it. And so, to answer your question more specifically about like, being in the church and wanting to be a creative and really not feeling maybe stilted or feeling freedom in that. When I got to USC, that was basically my boot camp, I think, in that, because up until that point, I had been kind of sheltered in a way, going to Christian schools, going to Pepperdine, which is like a pseudo-Christian university. I mean, it's Christian, but like, you know what I mean? But like going to USC, where it was just like, blah, blah, like it was like, whoa. This is completely different. And so there I was just like, how do I fully incorporate, because I loved Jesus from the giddy up, like basically from high school on. It was like, I'm all in, like, I might act a fool here or there or what have you, but like there was no doubt that I wanted to have Christ in my life. Like I loved who I was with him. I loved my life of adventure with him. Like that was not even on a question. But like, how do I maintain like really being a legit, authentic Christian, an authentic artist? And literally that's what my thesis film ended up being about, which is called Sunday Dreamer, which our mutual friend Justin ended up being the DP for. because my film school bestie, who is still my best friend to this day, Judy. I don't know if you remember Judy, but she and I like both had this question of like, can you be basically fully in the world and fully on fire, fully authentic for Jesus in a way that's like not what we're used to seeing in this cookie cutter way, or just in Christian media. Like how does that look? And because we were surrounded by our peers, in film school, that they know how to critique stuff. They knew what they wanted to see. They knew what they liked. So it wasn't like we were just catering to a Christian audience. And the fact that documentary even got made, miracle of the Lord, because they knew our subject matter, where I ended up following this kid. I call him a kid, but he was 24, who basically had the world presented to him with this incredible role of playing Elvis Presley. It's so funny, Craig. This generation has their new Elvis Presley. It's like this Disney star that they're doing this remake of Elvis Presley. And it reminded me of Sunday Dreamer, which is so crazy. And I think this kid may be a believer. I'm not quite sure. Sorry if anyone sees this later on, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's my story. This guy gets this role because he's just so anointed, because he's good at everything. He's not even an actor, but he gets the part. But then basically 2 weeks before they go to shoot this Elvis Presley miniseries, which, by the way, goes on to win many awards. But the 2 weeks before filming it, he declines. He tells the director, I can't do this. I feel like God has called me to go on, basically go out in the field and preach with my father, who was a tent revival preacher. And it was like, here's our story that we've been waiting for, number one, because the Lord, just the timing of how I even connected with him was the Lord. But exploring like how someone who is so anointed that Hollywood recognizes his creativity and his authenticity, but the church, he was so anointed in the church, like musically and prophetically, and he could preach. And it was just like, how does that look? What does that look like? And literally that was a 2-year exploration. And I could go into some of like the revelation the Lord showed my heart and showed Judy, who's been on this journey. But I'll just say this. It encouraged me that, number one, we are connected to the most creative source in the universe. And he has more dynamic ways to tell stories than we could ever imagine. And the church often gets nervous sometimes when we tell or want to show different stories. I think too, it does come down to our motivation of our heart. If we're just in it just to sort of, if our motivation is off, that's a different story. And I'm not talking about that, but I feel like the church has made some really cool strides in the last 10, 15 years of just becoming more open to different like storylines. But at the same time, there is a little bit of fear, because it's like, okay, if you're an artist, you might go off on the deep end and like do some real crazy, wacky stuff. And I think that's when Holy Spirit really comes, especially if you're a creative, like, number one, bringing your heart before the Lord, really allowing Holy Spirit to guide you in the storytelling. Like I was saying for Sunday Dreamer, it was, we were praying throughout the whole process. It wasn't like, okay, we're going to go out and do this thing on our own. We were praying throughout the whole process. And I think that sounds so elementary, but like, if you're doing a project, whether it is for the church, whether it is a Christian film, or whether it is I don't like to do like Christian and secular division a lot of times, but if it's a mainstream, I should say, film, like even so, like saturate that thing in prayer, invite Holy Spirit. I mean, he's already invited you into this, so keep him included, in it. And so I think for me, being always like a creative and wanting to experience like God and being kind of quirky already set me up to like really love the adventure with Holy Spirit in my creativity, and in being now this like creative professional, where it's like we're talking about like, how do you incorporate, who I am authentically as a believer in Christ, without like Bible beating anyone, and without, that, but really being true to like what he's invited us into. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but it is possible. I've seen so many others that are way beyond, like pioneer things for us, you and I, Craig, that are doing some incredible things. And I'm connected to some really incredible people in Hollywood that have a heart for God for real, like not for fakes, and that are really kingdom minded, but yet are really excellent at their craft,
Mm-hmm.
really, really excellent at craft and storytelling. So sorry, that was super long.
No.
Edit this however you want.
No, that was fantastic. And I think you hit on some really good points. Like I loved how you said like you're really excited for your adventure with Jesus in your life, because I think a lot of times people, church or not, like they have this weird view that to be in relationship, not religion, don't get me started on religion, but in an actual relationship, like it is adventurous. Like everything we do has an adventure to it, and it's exciting and it's not boring. I'm not saying it's easy. You're not just like just going down this guided tour on a rail like at Disneyland. Like you're going through some rapids and it's you're holding on, but like you know that the river guide knows what they're doing. Like it's exciting. And like I think that
Absolutely.
you're definitely fortunate to be able to, because I know a lot of people who went to religious schools like their whole life and then grew up in church, and now it's the complete opposite because the people in it and everything weren't authentic, like you were saying, and they don't show their humanity. It's always like this like facade, like, oh, look at my mask, like this is me, and it's like that's not the world. And like you were saying, there's I don't like to say like, oh, it's a secular story or film and this is Christian media. Like if I separate those two, Christian media is the stuff that's like, it's like an hour-long sermon that looks like it was shot on an iPhone in the 80s. Like it's, oh man, and you're like, wait, that had $2 million budget? It looks like they shot it for $5 in a sandwich. Like, oh, that I would just call Christian media, because that's in some religious box. But, I mean, look at people's stories. Like you said, like this subculture of drag queens. Like, it brought something, like when you can bring someone experiences that like brings them out of their bubble and let them experience the world and life. I think that's huge. So for you, working with where you're at now, because you obviously have this very strong belief system and faith and relationship, how do you manage that for someone who's like we were, like you work in a business where that's not necessarily like a good thing, like it's not the norm, and usually the people who are in it who like are just like you said Bible bashing and giving us bad names, like how do you manage that, especially owning your own business now and then working with people in this industry?
That's such a another great question. And also before I answer that, there are some quote unquote Christian media films that I actually do enjoy, especially when there's an anointing on it. Even if it's like not what I would consider up to my film, whatever, there's some that I cannot do. And, I bless you in your heart and your ministry for that. Because I know I know what is trying to be done. But there are some that are actually really powerful so I don't want to lump all of them for me. But I think how I've been able to, quote unquote, I guess, be strong, which is such a funny word to say, because in that it's because I showed my weakness. I mean, I had a season of really intense like anxiety and panic attacks, probably about 10 years ago, in the middle of this journey as well. And because I've always been a writer, I have journals and journals of like my own personal writing, but then I started doing an online, just a blog, just for me, just to kind of get things out. Because when I do write, it's very cathartic for me. And I felt like, you know what, it's not just supposed to be for me. I feel like it's going to heal somebody. So Lord, help me to stop navel gazing and just to really, Holy Spirit, just be with me as I write this, because my heart is aching. And so I would just put myself out there, and I would, anyone who's read my blog post know that I'm pretty much an open book, and I will really disclose like how I'm walking out my faith, or the struggles that I'm having in, whether it's panic and anxiety, or the mistakes I've made, how I've hurt people. And I feel like, we talked about putting like a human face to this thing. Like I'm not just, a Christian girl. I'm not just like, I'm Patrice, and I go through like hellish things, and I struggle like everybody else, and I have fear just like everybody else. started in this thing, thought I was going to be married, by 21 and have this adventure with my husband, and we would be doing films together. And I had this whole vision, and I've been single my entire, journey in this. And that was like not the plan. So like me expressing my heart, like in this, and this is the funny thing, because people that I work with in my industry, I would leave like the link of my blog post, or people would follow me on Facebook, and I would put, the post up for the blog, and people from my work would start reading it, like unbelievers, definitely unchurched, all different faith traditions, literally. And now this has been happening for the past almost 10 years. People have tracked with me, people that were that are staunch atheists will now pull me aside at work and want to have like a heart-to-heart talk, and just like, okay, I've read your blog and I'm not necessarily a believer, but like, what would you do in my case? Or I've had people ask me for prayer because they know like, this is how I'm walking through things. I mean, I had the privilege this year, someone that I was new to my team, leading them to the Lord because they've seen my track record of like, I've actually been through panic and anxiety. And like, literally, I'm like, that wasn't my goal necessarily in starting this. I just want it to be really real. I love people. I mean, I think when you start to love the Lord, he gives you his heart for people, because I did not really like people in Hollywood to begin with. I didn't really want that to be my quote unquote mission field. I didn't want all these. And then the Lord just, the more time you hang out with God, the more he shifts your heart. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I don't want there to be anything to hide. And the Lord kind of walked me through, like during my like season of panic and anxiety, I had a really interesting instance happen where I was working on a documentary, and we were following this one music artist, and we had left the camera on accidentally. This is such an amateur move, accidentally. And we were praying for this person who was not a believer. And we were praying like some really weighty things that would actually almost be offensive. In fact, they ended up becoming offensive once they were discovered, like what we were praying for this person. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to have to excuse myself in this project before you fire me, because I realized this is like so offensive that you're hearing some of these things. And I was like really embarrassed that I had actually hurt this person's feelings because of the things that they heard me pray. And I felt like the Lord actually in that moment, and this had to be, at least 8 or 9 years ago, the Lord's like, just so you know, like nothing is hidden that you do, Patrice. And the way in which you pray for people, the way in which you live your life has to be in such a way that if they were to discover a hidden tape, there would be no shame. There would be nothing to hide, because there's nothing that you can hide from me. So just begin to live in that freedom. And so that actually what was such an embarrassing thing, the Lord actually in his loving kindness brought me into a place of freedom of just being like, yeah, I won't pray in secret what I won't pray with the person necessarily in front of me. Meaning I might just like go to town when I'm in private, praying for that person, but I want to be able to be accountable and say like, this is what I was praying for you to their face, basically to their face. And so that basically, this whole idea of living really authentically, and I'm challenged on that every day. Like I don't have that like down, but that bleeds into everything that I do. My life is no longer compartmentalized. It is not segmented. I mean, it stopped being segmented, in many different ways, like from high school to college and then from college into a career. But then the Lord blew the roof off of that sucker, 8 or 9 years ago. And then ever since then, I never have to worry about like tiptoeing, like, can I say Jesus? Can I say God? I'm just like, if you're around me at work, if I'm on set we get into a real conversation, not just like talking about the weather and crap, but like if we talk for more than like 15 minutes, you're going to hear me talk about God. You're going to hear, and not because I'm trying to like convert you. Like, what? I'm not trying to convert you. Like, this is just the overflow of how I live my life. Mm-hmm. And that is it. God is really the most attractive thing. He is our home. He is our absolute home. And he really is the most attractive thing on the face of the planet. So it's like, I don't need to sell him. I don't need to try, like, I'm just trying to love him authentically. And from that, people start to come to you like magnets, and even work opportunities and things like that, where, people know my story. They know what I'm about. I don't get offered certain jobs, and I'm okay about that. Like, you're not going to have me do like the adult con. That's okay. That's fine. I don't need to do adult con. I'm totally, that's fine. But like, because they know me, and that's fine. But like, they also know that I'm not like religious, and I'm not gonna, because everyone on set, like, for example, like cusses like a sailor, whatever, and like that doesn't like bother. That's not a thing for me. But they know my heart, and they know, like, but when it comes down to Jesus, like, I'm really for real. And so I think hopefully that answers some of your question in some way of like the authentic, like not compartmentalizing, my life, and how people already have this sort of expectation because of my track record, because of me choosing to just be real and be vulnerable and show my weakness. Just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean, just because I love Jesus doesn't mean like I don't go through depression, that I don't go through this, that, and the other. But I always have victory over it every time. That's the difference. I have victory over it every time, because that's our promise. That's what he's promised us as his kids. And if you want in on that, okay, we can talk about that. We can have that conversation. But, anyway.
No, that's, yeah, I love that, like the overflow, because it's not anyone who hasn't been raised in church, or anyone who has to work with someone like us, like I don't go up to someone and be like, I'm gonna convert them and we're gonna talk. It's like, no, I legitimately just want to get to know this person. I'm working with them for the next few weeks. Like, I just want to like know you, and then that's just part of my life. So if that comes out in conversation, I'm not like, hey, I'm dragging you to church. We're going to this. Like, we're praying right now in this corner. That's not how it works. Or it shouldn't work. No, it's really good. The authenticity is really good. And I know we're running out of time, and I want to honor your time. So, are there any last things that's on your heart or mind that you would love to throw out to the audience? Any last conclusions or wrap ups?
Oh man, so many. Let me see. I mean, I just want to really encourage your audience of creatives, to be patient. I know that is such like the old lady thing to say, but I'm going to have to say it. Like, be patient, and it will be worth it. Like, God is actually utterly trustworthy with your heart, and utterly trustworthy with your dreams. And he will really guide you in terms of how to navigate relationships with people, and how to navigate being professional. We were talking about, we don't just kind of go up to people and just like, and hey, do you know about Jesus? Especially in a work setting. Like, I try to really, I'm actively trying to listen to Holy Spirit. Like, even as we're doing this interview, like, he's with us all the time. So it's like, I can actually check in with him at any time. I can just be like, what are your thoughts? What do you think? I don't have to get weird about it, but I can literally just engage with Holy Spirit and just see like, okay, how are you feeling about this conversation or whatever? And do you want to move in this direction or no? Sometimes they'll give me the like, no, just end it right here. And I think too, like, get really good at your craft and really exude professionalism and grace and kindness. Like, before, like, nothing is owed to you just because you think you have this big calling from the Lord. Like, don't go in with this haughty, prideful, that kind of spirit. I think when you're coming in humble and knowing that every hour is a gift, every day is a gift that you get to be on this adventure. And it's not that you have to be on an adventure. You get to be in this adventure. You were the one actually invited in, to this thing. And so I think there's a level of patience and humility. But as someone who's journeyed with the Lord, for these last, 15 years in this particular area of my creative journey, he has blown my mind, like, every year, every time, in a way that I did not expect. And I think something you said, Craig, earlier in our conversation, and I don't know if it'll be in this particular recording or not, but I'll repeat it. Like you said, coming to God I don't want to say just in the right, but in the posture of like, not simply to like accuse him or demand something, but to say, can we talk about this? And I feel like you nailed it. Like, there is that theme of humility, because one of my words that I use a lot when I'm starting to like train my team in what we do backstage or how we work creatively is like, you're going to be face to face with people that feel very entitled. They feel super entitled because of a variety of reasons, but we are going to come in with the opposite spirit. We're going to come with love, kindness, and humility. And I feel like that has been my superpower, honestly, my superpower in this area of creativity. And also I think too, in walking into promotions that I wasn't even qualified for, maybe on paper necessarily,
Sure.
but because I just, you know what I mean? And so I just want to encourage your audience, like, to be patient, to be humble, and to be kind. Please be kind to everyone in the journey, even when you're frustrated, because it's going to happen for you. Like, you're going to get your opportunity. You're going to get that opportunity that you thought would never, ever happen. It's going to happen. And will your heart be prepared? You don't want to get to that place and you just feel like crap, or you just feel like, ugh. You want to be able to fully engage in that season. And what you're sowing into right now is going to set you up to really be fruitful. And the fruit, I love to remind myself and others, like, the fruit is not just for you to just eat for yourself. It's actually for other people to enjoy the fruit of God's goodness in your life. And so just remember the people on the other side, and not just yourself while you're in this journey. And I think if you kind of keep that posture, it'll be super beneficial, and you'll be ahead of the game, much more ahead than I was at the beginning. Let me tell you that. You'll be much more ahead than I was.
All right, well, Patrice, I know we're out of time, but I just want to thank you so much for being here. This has been a great conversation. Where can people who have been touched by this conversation, where can they reach out to you, discover you, find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, they can find me online on all the socials. So they can find me on Instagram. Instagram is my jam. I do check my DMs, but Together Good Co. So that's just the word Together Good and then CO, all one phrase, Together Good Co. So at Together Good Co. on Instagram or on Facebook, and then my website, if you want to kind of check out a little bit more of what I do now in terms of creativity. TogetherGoodCo.com.